What's up, guys? Um, we're going to have a discussion today. We are going to compare roughly Cubase 10, and I'm a longtime Cubase user, just an FYI, I'll get more into that here in a moment. But we're going to compare Cubase with Presonus Studio One version 4.5 that just came out recently. So stay tuned and let's get into this. This version actually may have sold me a little bit more on Studio One than it did for the 4.0 or any other version, but they keep growing, ideally, with every version, and that's what makes this company so awesome. They make great products in general, very diverse, very functional, and aesthetically pleasing. That being said, they're really culminating it all to tie in with Studio One, which is another really cool pro. Let me get my notes here. Okay, so let's play around with some of these new features, right? So obviously, one off the bat is if we go in here and we select multiple channels here, we can now easily group these selected channels. And we can name the group and say, you know, hey, this is group 1. This is a similar thing that Cubase and Pro Tools, and I'm sure other DAWs have as well, but it's been a long time coming for Studio One. Studio One didn't have this before, and this is one of the coolest things now that it's actually added it in a functional way. So we're going to add those. We're going to come over into this. You'll see these little lines here. Basically, it shows a listing right here, and then we're just going to go into this group tab. Now, I might point out here too, I'm not a professional Studio One user by any means. I'm just a guy, a Cubase user, professionally and primarily playing around with Studio One, just because I like to nerd out. So bear with me. But back to the groups here. So you can see these channels here. We have it entitled as group 1 here. And if we right click on that, we have a very simplistic, nice equivalent of everything that else Studio One has done over the years. A very nice layout of what parameters these groups fall under. So if we just want just the editing, so say all of a sudden when we highlight those groups or just a single track within those groups, they all highlight. And if we do our cuts, great. Now, on the topic of editing really quick, this is one of the cons I found out about Studio One. Still currently, it's always existed and it bugs the crap out of me. And it's one of those things that if you're ever looking for an alternative, it's probably going to be one of those things that it may or may not hinder you. For me, it's hindering me. And it sounds silly, but it's the lack of no option for overlapping events. So you can't cut like this and make your edits like you normally would. Okay, so say that's the edit I want. I'm not going to play that because it's probably going to sound terrible. But you could still see there's gray underneath here. That means these areas are still overlapping. You could pull that out and then, yeah, but it messes you up. So there's no overlap or deleting overlapping events, and there's no option for it. And I feel, for me, that's a hindrance. I'd love to see that in another point update. I really wish it came out in 4.0. It would have been, honestly, aside from that, a perfect update in my opinion. But at least with the current way of editing in Studio One, it does provide really, it's still very quick. It's still very intuitive. You could still get all the jobs done that you need. But you know, it's just having that extra flexibility of working the way that you want to, which is what they've always been doing, but they don't quite fulfill it on a lot of just general areas. And I feel like this is a pretty general area little feature. And I know I'm probably ranting on that, but again, you know, if anybody from Presonus is watching that, add an option for deleting overlapping events, because it's a time saver. It makes things so much smoother and easier to edit, and you don't have a bunch of extra gray clips and doesn't get all messy and fatiguing on the eye. But moving on, one of the biggest things here, this is a big thing for me, and I'm sure it was for a lot of other users, is the new waveform generation. How like it generates and records and displays the waveforms.
it's actually pretty gorgeous looking at the moment. They did an excellent job. I love Cubase's waveforms and displays and GUI and stuff like that. Just kind of going in more into that, you can see here, if we open up just one of these waveforms, I mean, look how it's gorgeous. They did such a good job. And just for reference, though, I'll go back to what they did before. Draw smooth waveforms, right? If we turn that off, it just don't look as nice. Like, something don't look right with that. But we turn that on, and there you go. It's a small thing, but that was one of my biggest gripes with Studio One for years, really. And I'm so glad that they fixed that. Other things that I've noticed in Studio One, I don't know how long these features have been in there for, but I can guarantee you this is not happening with Cubase. Is if you come down here to the sample rate section and you right click that, or not right click it, but you left click it and you go in, you were to switch your sample rate. I won't do it here because it'll mess up my audio and everything. I don't want to do that. If you go in and you switch on the fly sample rate for, okay, hey, say you opened up a song and you did a session and one was in 44.1, and then say you did another one in 96 or whatever. It takes just a few seconds, but it will actually auto adjust your interface's sample rate and everything instead of having to manually go back in. So even if it's two separate devices like what I'm running, it'll handle it, which is just super efficient and it's super smart and good on them. Like, that's, for me, that's killer. Like, that saves me time and I like that. The mixer, I always felt, was one of Studio One's most strongest points. I mean, it's really a good looking mixer. It's easy on the eyes. Again, it doesn't look too fatiguing. Also, if we click on this little drop down icon here, we can actually, we have a ton of options, which is cool because they've constantly have always been adding different options, and that's super cool. As long as they keep on doing that, dude, they're on a path of great success. But one of the new features that they have is the input controls. Love it. You know, couldn't live without that. Again, now that they've added that in, it just, man, you're really selling me on it, aren't you? And I feel like that was probably the case for a lot of people. Subtle things, but they make a huge difference. I'm actually going to delete this group here. Dissolve group. Boom. And it's that easy. I love how easy it is. Being a Cubase user, it's easy to assign them, but you have to really know the software in order to kind of like unlink things. And that's what it is. It's linking channels and stuff in Cubase. They're actually not called groups because there's a group channel, which is essentially as a bus channel for Pro Tools or Studio One users or even Logic users. Kind of going on to more usability and how you have settings to go into different things and to allow different features to be used and stuff, which is always really good. And most DAWs have some sort of thing like that. I know Cubase for sure does. I would wager that Cubase up against Reaper or something like that is probably the most customizable DAW on the market, aside from Reaper in terms of raw functionality just out of the box. It's highly usable, but there's still a learning curve to it. Unlike something like Reaper, which, I mean, if we want to cover that really quick, it's super flexible, but it's almost too flexible for its own good. So unless you really sit there and you learn it and you customize it your way, which is, I think, the biggest benefit out of that particular DAW, something like Cubase works just a little bit more out of the box. You know, and I agree to disagree on that, but that's where I kind of felt. And I'm a fan of Reaper too, but it was definitely a lot of menu diving, a lot of stuff like that. Cubase kind of suffers from that too. You know, just little toolbars and things. And it's like, all right, you know, and once you get used to it, you're fine. It doesn't really bother me too much these days because I've just worked in it all the time. Like, that's just what you get used to. Studio One, it's a really nice, refreshing thing to come in here and you're still given a wide array of customization, you know, going into, again, these options. Again, you have a bunch of different settings here. Most of your core stuff is here. Some of the stuff is missing, but the way they even have it now, it's still very, very, very nice, very simple, straightforward. And again, the key word here is efficiency. As it stands, it isn't the most customizable in terms of like Cubase or Reaper being the most, but, you know, again, I digress. For what you get as straight out of the box as this is, you can't beat it. it works, and it's functional to, I'd say, 90% of its users as soon as you do a fresh install on it. So, that being said, there is no cyclical updates for Studio One. I kind of like to know that, and maybe it's just a looking forward to something kind of mentality, and maybe that's, not so good of me, but I get excited about new versions and stuff like that, and improvements and new features. And obviously, like I said before, Studio One's really great on adding those new features and implementing all sorts of different features and stuff. But yeah, they don't really have a set cycle. It happens whenever it happens. Sometimes, you'll get a nice little handy dandy update here and there, and their updates are all worthy updates, though. It's not just bug fixes. It'll be bug fixes and, oh, by the way, we added an extra feature in or something like that. Only recently, the last update with Steinberg's Cubase, version 10, that is, the newest version, the 10.0220, I think it is, did they actually start implementing new little features. And it was only like one or two things. They brought back a color wheel feature, which was cool, but, again, handy, but not life or death kind of thing. And then they also added a it's velocity sensitive hit point detection is what it is. So when they added that in, that was a really good little thing for them to add into an update. Studio One has always done that, though. They've always added in little extra features with every little point update, which are free, by the way, and so are the point updates, just the maintenance updates for Cubase. But a 4.5 update like this, if this was a Steinberg's model, you'd be paying $100 or $50 or $100 for the update. This completely free to its users, so big win for Presonus there, and they're much more generous with their sales or deals and stuff like that, and Steinberg is kind of catching up to that. They're really now trying to play catch up, and it's kind of weird because now the tables have turned. It's like Presonus is now kind of doing things that Steinberg is doing, and I know that this has kind of always been the case, but really now it's more obvious than it was before. That's really cool, and I feel like hopefully everybody continues on doing that because it just makes a better all-around platform and a program. As long as they're still maintaining their bug fixes, of course, as well, because I'll be honest, personally, I'll take bug fixes over new features any day. But hey, if both work great, I'm not going to complain. So another thing here is in Studio One, wins hands down is the layout of its tracks. And I don't mean just like these normal tracks. I mean, yeah, those look fine too. When you go in and say you want to add a tempo track, you have a nice selected tempo track that is stationary. It doesn't move. It's kind of locked into place, which I feel for tempo mapping and stuff, it's nice to have. In Cubase, it's really all over the place, and you have to basically make your template. If you don't already have a template, you have to make it every time. It doesn't show up where you always want it to. You have to kind of, okay, if I'm going to be under this track here, then it's going to be generated underneath that or wherever. And then I have to drag it to the top or bottom or wherever you want. Sure, it's nice to have a flexible thing, but it's also really nice just to have one that's built into a window that's just like, oh, this is the tempo mapping window. Oh, okay, maybe I want to open the chord track. If we open this up, you have a very nice dialog box, very similar to Cubase's, but Cubase's opens up on the lower window or the lower transport panel. It's a third-party window here. It's very nicely laid out. You got your circle of fifths or your wheel of fifths or whatever you want to call that. That's cool. So, I mean, you can audition notes. You can actually have that mapped to whatever sound you want. I don't know how to do that yet, full disclosure, so, but it's there. You can definitely do it. And yeah, so that's your chord track, and I feel like, just from what I've seen and heard, it follows the music and it repitches the music in such a mind-blowing, efficient way that, yeah, I think it may have overpassed Cubase on that level. A Ranger track, same thing. Again, Ranger track, same thing with the chord track and the tempo track. You have a separate channel for these things. Write in intro, verse, chorus, whatever you want, and then you could rename it whatever. So again, it's the small things, but it really helps, man. It really, really helps. Another thing though is just how it handles automation. I find is now I love Cubase's automation. I've always praised Cubase for their automation, but man, being able to have an overall like windowed view, being able to switch, like if I create automation, like you still have your automation lanes, which you can't really live without. Every DAW has that. But now if we go into envelope mode, it will show just the automation. And it's just ways to clean things up and to manage things. And I feel like that's really cool to have. It's been a general Studio One thing for a while, but I love it. So aside from gain structure, which is what this little knob here is, it's like a trim knob, which is awesome. You now have the full phase support, which has just been kind of a mainstay in both Cubase and Pro Tools, and I think even Logic Pro. Great to see it here. What's even cooler with this one, and I can't speak on behalf of Pro Tools because I'm not a Pro Tools user. I used it once, and that was one time too many for me. Is you have individual left and right phase support. So basically phase inverting your stereo file, or you could just do the left or right side. Super cool stuff. Everybody's been asking for expression maps, and I feel like that would have been a really welcomed addition to really knock it out of the park in this 4.5 update. But again, for what we get, it's still super fantastic. Otherwise, I feel like the MIDI still works really well. I mean, there's no issues or qualms there. It feels good. It does what it needs to do. Another thing I like maybe a little bit more than Cubase on a personal note, all of this is really personal, just FYI, but whatever, is the drum map mode, where you can come in here and you could basically boom, boom, throw in whatever kind of patterning you want. And it's pretty quick and it's pretty efficient. Cubase has a really kick-ass drum map mode as well, but you have to kind of come out here onto the edge of the track and hit that and then go back into it. And yeah, because it won't automatically switch over like you see Studio One do here. Again, it just saves time. I wish Steinberg would fix that in Cubase because, man, that does, it takes a little bit more time than you might realize. When we go into add an instrument track, even though that's fairly simple, in Studio One you have to come in here, go into an instrument, and it'll scan your plugins and your VSTs, and then you have to drag it on here. As far as I know, there's no other way. Maybe you could do it with a macro or something like that. Studio One has awesome macro control, very similar to Cubase, which also has awesome macro control. Again, I know that they optimize Studio One for multi-core support. That's awesome. I think that's necessary for every major DAW that wants to play with the big boys these days. It still kind of handles things a little weird, where if I remove this track, it will still appear here in the instruments, and they all do. Like, it's the weirdest thing, and it bugs the crap out of me. And then you could remove it there. They have implemented it in a way now, which is nice, and this is why I say they're improving it. Is if we say we added another instrument track here, and we added, again, click and drag. Okay, cool, there we are. But at least now you can delete this with the instrument now. Before in Studio One, even for 4.0, if I remember correctly, you were not able to do that. So being able to do that now, it's great. I love that. And I guess in closing here, one thing I would love to see though is when you click into audio samples like this, to do something similar to Cubase or Ableton, preferably Ableton, because I really like how they handle audio manipulation and clip automation, and go in and draw in an envelope shape to control and pitch bend audio. That is the coolest thing, and I've used that for years, ever since I was an Ableton user, and I use it in Cubase. Cubase has a different plugin that you have to use event effects or offline processing, and it works just as good. But I've wanted that in Studio One since version 1, and I still want that even to this day. So they listen to their users. That's the big thing, though. This is kind of the nail in the coffin for me, is if Cubase gives me strife, I'm not even going to lie to you, I found my alternative if Cubase just decides not to work for me, because sometimes, unfortunately, that happens, and it gets really frustrating. And it's like, guys, every bug that Cubase has had, it's either been in one of two classes. Either A, it's small and I could work around it, but I still have to work around it, or B, it's kind of a fatal bug and it just crashes my projects. And I've even came really close to losing projects. And, you know, if Steinberg knows one thing about its customers, and it's not just me, if you're a working professional, you can't have that. That's not viable. So, you know, I've seen Studio One just in my experiences. Yes, it has a few little bugs and glitches. No software is perfect, obviously, but they're really getting close, man. They are really getting close. And this has kind of just been an overview of my personal thoughts on Studio One version 4.5. I love it. I think it's going to really, I mean, it's cutting it close now, guys. I mean, if you're asking me, my word's worth anything. I know I'm just a guy on YouTube here, but man, it's getting close. If there's going to be kind of a quote-unquote new industry standard, I think it'd be Studio One before everything else. I mean, it's already pretty much got Pro Tools in the bag. It's got majority of Cubase in the bag, aside from, again, like expression maps, some pitch bend little features, stuff like that. And man, I don't know, like that it's tough. I love the software, though. I think they've done great. You know, kudos to them. I hope that you know, it just takes off even more for them, and you know, I hope it does become that standard, because man, I'll totally be using it. And and that's another thing, is the reason that standards are kind of nice to have in place. Obviously, you'll always be able to use whatever you want to use, but the reason that a lot of studios used Pro Tools was because it was, for one, a gear purchase that a bunch of studios invested in, and it was the only thing that was worthy at the time that could do heavy audio manipulation and editing and mixing tasks. It was really, I mean, yeah, you had, I think, Logic, and you definitely had Cubase, but Cubase was always more for the composers, and until like earlier 2000s, then it started kind of coming around for audio. Pro Tools was always kind of already at that level, and it's just kind of, again, grown in of itself over the years. But now you get, mostly all the DAWs are really comparable with each other, and now more than ever, when you get a DAW like this that basically takes everything that you love in Logic Pro and everything that you love in Cubase, for the most part, and everything that you love in Pro Tools, especially Pro Tools. Like, I've talked to guys that have used Pro Tools, and they are glamored by Studio One, and I can understand why, because I'm glamored by it, and I'm a Cubase user, like, if that's any consolation. So there you have it, man. I mean, now, again, like, we don't deal with so many big studios as much anymore. Of course, they're still there, but they'll still use, more oftentimes than not, Pro Tools, just because that's what they've already invested in. And it was a lot easier to share stems, share multi-tracks, share file projects, whatever you needed, and AAF support, whatever. Now, but you have that, though. You have that in a way more streamlined and modern piece of kit, and that's great. So I'm really excited for that. Yeah, I apologize, it's probably a really long video. Just fun ranting, though, and seeing what's up. And yeah, hope you guys like nerding out with me. And yeah, if you like more kind of rants and raves and just overviews and talks like this, let me know, and you know, I'd love to talk more about it. So until next time, let's have a discussion about this. Leave it in the comments below, and yeah, we'll talk to you guys next time. You guys have a good evening. Bye.